and welcome to Badaboom. I'm Troy. On today's episode of the podcast, we welcome back Jeremy Adams. Jeremy Adams has written for The Flash, Green Lantern, and most recently, Aquaman. He's also recently signed a 2-year contract to be exclusive to DC. We talk about all these books, what it's like to be signed exclusively to DC, and more. Listen in and bada boom. Hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I said just before we started recording, you're one of our few third time guests to come on the show. So obviously that means we really like you.
All right, great. I expect the plaque in the mail at any time.
Honestly, I would definitely send you one because the amount of things you've been putting out that I can't stop talking about and have been a hardcore fan of has
Thank
been
you.
growing ever since you've been coming on our show for Super Sons. That
Thanks.
was, I think, the first time you came
Yeah,
on.
probably. Yeah.
But what you've done with Green Lantern Corps, and now Aquaman, like chef's kiss. What's
Thanks.
it what's it been like to kind of see all this stuff develop through DC? Like we briefly caught up with you at New York Comic Con the day it was announced you were doing Aquaman. So
Yeah.
what's it been like to ride this continuous growing tidal wave of success?
Yeah. It's great, dude. I mean, what can you say? It's like, this is everything young Jeremy wanted to do. There are always things to complain about in any job. Like at the base level, I feel like every job is the same, right? And it's really about dealing with other people. But then I take a step back and I'm like, oh, I just got to figure out what Aquaman has to do today. There is a level of absurdity that I get paid to do what I've loved my entire life, but it's great. It's super fun, and I keep, pitching crazy ideas, and sometimes there's a yes, sometimes there's a no. But I'm actually surprised with Aquaman in particular. I'm surprised that they're letting me kind of take it in a different kind of strange direction, But I've said this before. Part of that is because I'm just not smart enough to write about Atlantean politics. So, I'm like, well, let's get out of there. So I do that.
Yeah, I love what you're doing with Aquaman because I also was like, I'm not always the biggest Aquaman fan. And so as soon as you're like, hey guys, we're just gonna leave Atlantis, I
Yeah,
was like, hey, this is gonna be a good opportunity to see a whole new world that we haven't really seen with the character.
right.
But I was curious because like the first issue, everyone was like, is this actually gonna flip and be like, oh hey, we did this one number one that was all in, and now we're just gonna move over to a different number one that's absolute Aquaman, and this was just a tease.
Oh,
I
that's
was
fun.
I was curious, was Aquaman, absolute Aquaman on the table for you at any point, or was it just an
Oh,
all in?
no, no, not at all. It was just an all-in, but after the all-in special with the death of Darkseid, that's going to have like kind of reverberating effects throughout both obviously the absolute universe and the all-in universe, and so there's some of those elements that we're playing with in Aquaman that we're trying to get a hold of. But that's like a very long-term, Scott Snyder especially has very long-term plans for all of that. And Marie and everybody, we're just trying to we're trying to extend it without like the worst thing that could happen is like, hey, we're gonna have another event, right away. I think it's like, hey, we're going to try to build up the momentum so that if something does happen, you'll be really excited for it. But obviously, Darkseid, his explosion or whatever in the All In has, it just has an after effect. So it wasn't on the table for All In Aquaman. I'm sure they're going to get to All In Aquaman. I'm sure. I'm sure that, you know what I mean? I've even pitched an All In project. But my stuff generally, my pitches, they just get ignored. Like,
What are you
they're like,
talking
that's too
about?
weird. That's too strange. So, but I'm really excited because Aquaman has kind of pushed into this. I really love high fantasy, and it kind of has a high fantasy vibe to it. And being able to pull in some characters, there's some characters that are going to show up in Aquaman that people are just going to be like, wait, what? Huh? What? Ah, and whether or not they like it or not, I don't know. But we're in my writing, I'm nearing the end of my first, as we said, like wave. and that will roll into the next part of the story, which I'm excited about, which has some dramatic underpinnings. So yeah, it's really cool, man. Like I'm excited that I get to do some of this stuff. And what I'm excited about in the next issue is we had it in the last issue. The Lady of the Lake is making a weapon for Arthur because he doesn't have Poseidon's trident with him, and
Yeah.
um, and so there's this hilarious video I'll post when it comes out of how I was talking with John Timms about like he would go, "Oh, it looks like this." I go, "No, no," and I had to like run to Home Depot and like build it out of PVC pipe and stuff, and then have my daughter videotape me. So like I come back and like, "No, it's like this," you know. And it's so stupid, but I can't wait to post it so people see how absolutely ridiculous I am in terms of my fanboyness, in doing this.
Listen, that's
You
great
got it.
reference.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. You got to get like a model credit for
Right.
that issue.
Yeah, right. No, it's cool. It's cool.
No,
But I
and
think that's one of the oh,
oh no, I was gonna say I really enjoyed that too aspect of sort of like even though the story's just started and we're 3 issues in, you really haven't held back with new things to introduce to sort of like the mythos. And what's
Right.
cool about sort of the tie-in things is that like you said, it doesn't feel like overbearing. Like it's like really cool, like added details. Like, okay, like if you read Absolute Power, you know everyone's powers are out of whack.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
read the All-In special, you know Darkseid sort of exploded and there's this mystery about where he is and we know it's affecting the whole universe.
Yeah.
And then you're sort of adding your own little things about like, all right, like these are his new powers. Now he's going to get a new weapon. And I think that really sort of makes people like dive in. And I think Aquaman's one of those characters that because he for so long people were like, "Oh, what do you do? He just talks to fish."
Right.
Like there is, I feel like when people do him well, they're like, oh, actually, did you know like most of the world is, the ocean? So
Yeah.
wouldn't that
Yeah. Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
really powerful thing to sort of have? So I really love when people like have fun with them. I have to say, like my favorite like DC movie, the last, outside of the Batman, because everyone loves Batman,
Yeah.
but it was Aquaman. I remember going to see that and
Yeah.
seeing sort of like, all right, like this is very like you said, high fantasy. It felt like Flash Gordon. It
Yeah.
was like all this new fan. So I think you're really playing with some fun things, and I think me as a reader, I've been loving it. I'm like, all right, like where do we go next?
Thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah. I remember seeing the first Aquaman. I really enjoyed it because I
Mm.
don't know. I had like low expectations, I guess. I don't
Ah,
know.
same.
But there's that moment where like his eyes turned a different color underwater
Mm,
and like the whole like water like lit up.
mm,
And I was like, this is awesome. It was pretty cool. I really, really dug it. I think Jason Momoa is cool. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely it's just weird stuff where I'm just
mm,
like, so wait, Aquaman never hung out with the Lady of the Lake? Like there are
mm,
things that I'm just like, mining the pieces of aqua lore
mm,
that maybe haven't been mined before, or like underwater. Even the idea of the blue, I was just like, the editors were like, no, we haven't done that.
mm.
That's not a thing. And I'm like, well, it is now. Like, we can't have the red green and not
Mm,
have, you know what I mean? Like, you
yeah,
can't, it just seems like a layup. So it's a fun thing to explore. And I think the thing that I'm always trying to work on as a comic book writer, and sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't, but I plead the fact that I'm not that I'm fairly new at this
yeah,
still. And it's the pacing of a comic book. So so you never know. So I'll give you an example in Green Lantern, I had this story with Hal on Earth, and it was very much like I was like forcing myself not to go to space because that was part of the mandate that we
mm,
wanted for Hal to be on Earth. But I was always hinting about all this stuff happening in space, the quarantine or the blockade, the quarantine,
yeah,
and United Planets, and that kept kind of like percolating in the background until finally it's like Sinestro's there and like what's going on,
mm,
and the central power battery, and then it explodes. And I would get some criticism like that took too long, and I'm like, I get it. I get it. Like, but I'm also trying, I also, if it's too fast, I feel like it's not going to be as satisfying. Um, and it's always a weird thing as a writer to be like, how do I do this in a way that will expose the big secret or, the big showdown and make readers still be engaged with it for that long, you know? it's really difficult for me. So
I mean, I think you nailed it on Green Lantern because I remember we were talking about it and I tried weeding some things out from what's happening with the spectrum, why Sinestro got the rage
yeah,
instead of the yellow. So like that pacing, like you said, you want to rush to the next big payoff sometimes
right,
for
right,
people, but it makes people stay awake at night being like, well, what is actually going
right,
on in space?
right,
What is
right.
Sinestro really up to?
And by the
So
way, that's like a conversation I have because I think there are some people in editorial that just want me to say it right away. And I'm like, but I don't want to. There has to be, and people don't talk like that, number one.
Yeah.
And number two, if the ending of Lost was told in the first year, you would be like, I'm not going to stick around.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I would rather have the mystery and kind of like dole it out a little bit because you don't know who's telling the truth and who's not telling the truth too. That's something that I think there's something that's going to happen in Green Lantern, which is a very old callback, but it's very much we never saw it on the page. So like to me, I'm like, that's a unreliable narrator. Oh, this is what happened. It's like, well, maybe that's what happened, but if I didn't see it, even if I did see it half the time, but
Yeah.
but it is, as a fan, I'll give you an example. There was a moment in X-Men when I was reading X-Men and Madeline Pryor showed up. And this is like, I don't know how many years after Jean Grey died, right?
Mm.
And Madeline Pryor shows up, and as a fan, I'm going, she looks just like Jean Grey. Like, are we
Mm.
all freaking out? Like, this is weird, right?
Yeah.
And they don't really explain it for a long time, you
Mm.
know? And so you're sitting there going like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
your head is just like swirling with what could this mean? What is this? I don't understand. The same thing in Buffy season, I don't know, like five or I think it was five. It was like at the end of four or something. Dawn, who is her sister, showed up. And everybody's just like, as a fan watching it in real time, you're going, this is stupid. She doesn't have a sister. Like, that's dumb. And you're like, they screwed up. You immediately start thinking the writers screwed up because you're like, she's an only child. This doesn't make sense. And then the next season, they're like very happy for the reader to be upset. And then like halfway through the season, suddenly the mom looks at her and says, "You're not my daughter." And you're like, "What?" Like you've been played as a reader. You've been pulled along with this mystery. You've been, sent down a rabbit trail that's not doesn't know what it means, or you don't know what it means. Because I think sometimes if you make it too easy, then people don't feel satisfied, right? Some people that figured out that Kilowog was dead very early on, I was kudos to them.
Yeah.
Like I was like, good for you. But I also wanted to make it so questionable.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a fun thing as a writer to try to like trick people too.
Yeah, and
I
it's
mean,
something
you
that's
had me
missing
sold.
in comics too. Like I think sort of what's really cool about sort of what you've been doing with Green Lantern and Aquaman is that people can buy it and sort of be like, okay, like this probably has to go on at least 12 issues based on like what you're doing. And I think
Right,
that's sort of like where a lot of people get checked out. And I think that's what DC's doing really well with a lot of the books going on with All In and Absolute. Like I could read Absolute Batman and be like, okay, that tease of Absolute Joker, you don't have to show me that because I know this is going to be going on for a while and stuff. And I think that's sort of like really good. And again, it allows you as a writer to have a B, a C, a
yeah,
crazy plot, and then have those callbacks maybe in 12 issues. Like I remember, like recently, like a year or two ago, I read Jeff Johns's Flash.
yeah,
And when the Zoom twist happens, like even me, like knowing that's sort of like coming, I'm like, wow, we're a lot of issues in, and I like this has not happened yet. And then when it eventually happens, you're like, all that trust between them, the betrayal comes in. So I
yeah,
think it allows you as a writer and us as readers to be more invested. Like, yes, like we all
yeah,
want that like instant gratification, but I think a lot of that has sort of like killed momentum in comics, and it's why a lot of series end up being mini series and stuff like that
yeah,
because it's like people are like, well, I will just trade weight it because they'll have the reveal,
right,
and instead of being able to be like, I have to grab every issue because I'm
right.
invested, I have to see the little details and all that.
I I hope you're right. Like
Same.
if the sales dip, they're going to be
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, that was eight in an 8-issue miniseries."
Yeah.
I remember that happening. I would be reading books, and I'm like, "This is so great," and the next issue would be like, nine in a nine-issue miniseries. I'm like, oh no. Like obviously the sales had dropped and they just
Yeah.
slapped that title on, suddenly.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think your books, especially Green Lantern, it can't be a mini series because
Right.
it's such a periodical like journey.
Yeah.
Looking back to when you were first starting to write Green Lantern, and then this past issue with someone gets possessed by like the red spectrum, and Hal
Right.
Jordan's trying to fight them off. It's like we've come so far, but like does to like Chris's point, it doesn't feel like it's been that many issues.
Right.
And maybe it's because like Absolute Power kind of broke that up a little bit,
Yeah.
but there's so many characters you're playing with, but they're all getting really good amount of screen time and really good character development.
Thank you.
How do you go between like 8 Green Lanterns from Earth and Kilowog
Yeah.
and the new characters to be like, hey, you get some screen time, but we're also going to make sure people care about you through development.
Yeah, it's hard. I think Green Lantern's hard like that. I mean, one of the things, like when I was doing The Flash, it lent itself to little, maybe smaller stories for me,
Mm,
at least me. For the Green Lantern, it just feels it feels immediately serialized. Like you have so much you have to say and do. Um, and then I like characters, man.
mm,
I love all these characters. But I don't like characters just being set dressing. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like if I'm gonna have a character in a series, I want to give them something, some moment, some piece of action, something to say. Like,
mm,
Kilowog's going to say Poozer or whatever. He's going to come
mm,
back at a certain time when it needs to be. Um, I'm very grateful because I feel like DC said, hey, look, your book is doing well enough that we think it can support the Green Lantern Corps. And so Morgan and I definitely planned out this idea of we can concentrate on more lanterns. We can do little arcs with them for like an A plot and a B plot. So we can concentrate on John, the B plot, we can concentrate on like Kilowog and Razor.
mm,
And then after a couple issues, we'll go to Guy and then, like a B plot with like Simon and Kelly. And we have big plans for each of those individual characters leading up to kind of an internal Green Lantern event that will go back and forth between those two. I mean, it's not like a secret. It's going to be the
mm,
culmination of all the Sorrow stuff and Starbreaker and all
mm,
that stuff. And so that's been really, really fun because we have a huge amount of ground to cover, but we also have a lot of characters that we can use, before we like all comics, I feel like is a push and pull of, one of my first comics I ever read that I loved was Daredevil Born Again by Frank Miller and Mazzucchelli. And it like opens with it's Daredevil, but then his entire existence gets, destroyed. But then at the end, it's like, oh, we're back to being Daredevil. There's this push and pull that you want to do as a comic to take them on this really massive journey and then bring them back so that you can take them on another massive journey. Like
mm,
there's that kind of weird pendulum swing. I think the challenge with Green Lantern, at least for me, was um, Green Lantern has kind of been, the mythology and stuff has been exploded and condensed and all sorts of stuff. And so I felt like my job was to there was a lot of like loose threads that I wanted to tie up and bring back to like I think by issue 19 when we did the fractured spectrum special and stuff, like it is a status quo. Like they're
mm,
back to being space cops. Green Lantern Corps there. There's a central power battery on Oa. But then I present a bunch of other questions like why are the Guardians, youngish and have weird
mm,
different emotional spectrum symbols on their smocks?
mm,
What's there's no AI control. You're not getting picked because of your willpower necessarily.
mm,
There's a little more humanity involved where we get to vet them a little bit more,
mm,
which, brings up the whole other question of like, so these things were just picking people randomly, like,
mm.
like I don't know, there should be a character, thing that, checks them out, I guess.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's how Guy slipped through.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Guy is still though the my absolute favorite like Green Lantern to write 100% of the time. And I never hits me until it happens.
Mm,
Like there's this scene where the United Planet says, we have a job for basically like Guy Gardner, we have something for you to do. And he's like, screw you, man. Like, I'm not going to do what the man says. And it's like, we need you to hunt down Lobo. And he's like, I love it. Like, immediately turns on a dime. And then adding this kind of extra where he's kind of this weird lore master when it comes to, he's the Nicolas Cage and National Treasure. Like, oh, I love the little bits because I really like Guy. We have an arc coming up in Green Lantern Corps where basically Guy has it's kind of a ride along. He has to take a newbie lantern with him, and it is just like, to me, it's so funny.
Yeah,
And V. Ken Marion, who does the art, it's just like so funny, and he just gets it perfectly. The smarmy, like, I'm Guy Gardner. Like,
yeah,
he's kind of a jerk, but he's also awesome.
yeah.
So I don't know. I'm tangenting. Sorry.
No, no.
No,
Again, Guy's one of those characters that, like, again, you love and hate him.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
even a love or hate. It's like you love and hate him just because of who he is. And I think sort of like the perfect encapsulation of that is that scene in Young Justice when they're picking out a new Justice League member, and then Guy comes up, and both Hal and John
Yeah.
are just like, no,
No. Yeah. Yeah.
no,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like, well, that's your coworker, so.
Yeah. Yeah. I love writing characters like that's why I hope, they've done this with Damien. They've matured him so much that I'm like, don't lose the edge. Don't lose the
Yeah.
joy of writing that character that can kill you and
Mm.
would probably,
Mm.
if he, if he didn't
Yeah.
have moral direction. Like it is really fun to have those characters, those extreme characters.
Yeah, and I
yeah,
think he's a lot like, Maverick in Top Gun Maverick. I feel like
Yeah.
he's like that guy that just never, like, no matter how much he ages, how seasoned he becomes, a veteran in that he's sort of like the same guy in a lot of ways, but he
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
has a lot of that it's like, all right, that's where all the years of being a superhero and a part of the Justice League come in. But again, he's just one of those interesting characters where, like, yeah, he's a jerk, but there's just something about him that you're just like, you
Charming
love to
jerk.
read
Yeah.
him, and it's just like you want him around.
Yeah. He's kind of the Bill Burr of the DC comics. Like, like,
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah,
this is stupid. Those tights are stupid. Like, I
yeah,
can see him just be like,
yeah. And then out of
yeah.
nowhere says something super insightful. You're like, where
yeah,
did that
exactly,
come
exactly. Yeah,
I was like, that's why we keep him around. He's crap 90% of the time, but that 10% it makes sense.
from?
totally. I agree.
But I know there's like tons of stuff that keep popping up on like the All In. Like I picked up, I think it's like Secret Six or Super Six the other week. That
Uh-huh.
was a new All In special, and you're now doing an exclusive contract with DC. So, are there any more All In specials from you that we might be able to expect in the future?
Uh, I mean, I want to say no, but like, I'm always hopeful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's nothing in the works. I pitch a lot of, like I said, I pitch a lot of things. And I think I have a line on something that's really interesting. I think it's weird. I mean, being very transparent, I think it's interesting. I'm doing characters that I really enjoy doing.
Mm,
They're not necessarily the thing that I thought I would be doing. They're not the thing that I'm like that I started out being the most passionate about. It's
mm,
more of these are things that I found the passion in.
yeah.
Mm,
Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman are all characters that I really enjoyed reading and growing up, but they weren't like my favorite. I had definitely a very peculiar taste level. It was like the Justice League International, like the obviously the Ted Cord Blue Beetle stuff. I love Batman, obviously. There are some of those characters that you're like, I'm at. It's a weird thing to talk about because it's also like I love DC martial arts books. I
Yeah.
loved, I don't know, the last one was like Chuck Dixon's Richard Dragon, which was freaking awesome. And then, Cassandra Cain as the Batgirl series was so
Mm,
good. And I loved Birds of Prey and like everything that touched on the different like martial arts stuff. Because I'm a martial art
yeah.
nut, I loved all that stuff. And I thought DC is very identified with all that stuff. But um it's interesting. It's like I think DC, one of the reasons they asked me to be exclusive, I think they were just kind of like, hey, we're noticing that you do solid work, but also that your sales are solid, and that there seems to be a level of fan that has come with me, and
mm,
which I'm beyond grateful for, that like have stuck with me. And that is an interesting thing to be in because I think it helps them go, hey, is there a character that maybe the book's not doing as well that we can put Jeremy on that will help do well? Like you notice they're not going, hey, Jeremy, why don't you go on one of the big selling books?
Yeah.
Which I would love to do because I would be curious how that would affect me as a writer
Mhm.
and how that would affect the fandom. Like, could if I was on a bigger book, could that grab enough eyeballs they would want to come back and check out some of the stuff I'm doing on Aquaman or doing on
Yeah.
Green Lantern? I don't know because I would love to try my hand at a Batman thing and which is tied up by many creators forever.
Yeah.
And I would love to try my hand at a Superman thing. I would love to try my hand at a Wonder Woman thing. But those are all being utilized and done by really incredibly capable and talented people. But as a writer, you just want to try, right?
Yeah.
So in the meantime, I'm really enjoying the arcs I have on these characters. And I have some other weirdly, I don't want to say lesser known, but they're not like the most high profile superhero characters that I would love to tackle as well. If they let me do it, that'll be a question. Right now, I think they're like, you're doing 3. That's good,
Yeah.
and I'm doing 4 technically because I'm doing
Yeah.
Flash Gordon still. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
get Etrigan, the
yeah,
detective
yeah,
chimp.
just
There's a whole
line
list of obscure,
I would love to
characters
do
you can.
some of that occult stuff, like the Justice League Dark or something in the kind of like mysticism stuff. That would be really fun. Growing up, I loved Doctor Strange and Doctor Fate and all that stuff. That was really cool to me. The Ditko, my dad gave me, I still have it somewhere over here. It's like a paperback version of the Ditko Doctor Strange. I still think it's just the coolest. I'm like such a Ditko fan, man.
Yeah. No, all that
Yeah, I
stuff is
think
amazing.
I think you hit it right on the head though, and you pretty much said exactly how I feel about you and your books. Is like you really snagged me on Flash, and I mean everything you've pretty much done. Super Sons, Green Lanterns. So anything you put out in the future, whether it's a small title or a large title, I will be adding it to my pull list and
I
probably buying
appreciate
like
that.
a couple of variants along the way.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate
But
that.
But if you could do something in martial arts, I think that would also be a really cool. Like once you said it, I was like, yeah, that would be a really cool thing to do, and you can get even more model credits for those too. I
Oh
bet.
man. I pitched a crazy one the other day, and some of my favorite things is like pitching something that I know there's no reason for them ever to publish, and just the looks that I get back, which is just like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, it would be awesome, because I'm convinced that I'm convinced. No one else is,
Yeah.
but I'm convinced that like, hey, listen, just let me try it because I think I can get people hyped about it. I think, and at some point I'll do like a creator own. And I was going to do one last year, but I got so in my head about it. Like
Yeah.
it was so not in my head. It was so not highbrow. Like I'll just be really honest. It
Yeah.
was so just like, this is stupid, but it'd be cool,
Yeah.
and I was super excited about it. And then I just kept second guessing myself like, oh, they're going to read this and think you're such an idiot, and I just kept laughing and then I ended up talking myself out of it. Now I'm talked back into it, but I'm not, I have an exclusive deal, so you know,
You're late.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's
I'll
awesome.
have to scratch out time to do it on the side and just be like, okay, here's the stupid idea.
Yeah, I think that's fun. I think sometimes like people again sort of associate like indie and creator owned like you have to have this like challenging of society
Right,
like this highbrow thing, but it's like
right,
I think there's enough there, and I think especially now with like all the creators that have come from like the big two that have gone into creator owned, it's like oh like there's a little bit of horror. There are some
right.
like superhero stuff, but I would love again to see. And maybe you pitch a world's finest one shot where like Bruce Lee shows up, if we've already gotten like Shatner and all
Yeah,
these covers and
yeah.
stuff like that, I'm sure you could get back on World's Finest and do a one shot with maybe Green Arrow and Connor Hawk,
No.
you know,
We were
doing a
when we
tournament
were
of power.
doing when we were doing Batman Soul of the Dragon. Like, first of all, that's one of my favorite things I've ever written. And the cover is Sienkiewicz did this cover that's just
Yeah.
unbelievable. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But I was begging them, and I was trying to do it on my own to get it to happen. I was trying to get Black Belt magazine to have Batman on the cover. Like I thought I was like, this would be the most badass cover to exist. And, like I could not get anybody to okay this idea that I had because I was just like, it'll be so awesome. I was losing my mind. And I
Yeah.
still think stuff like that would be, be rad.
Yeah.
So
Just have the photo of the Batman the animated series Bruce Wayne and his
yeah,
like with his
yeah.
black belt and
I
stuff
just
like
want him
that as a
like
cover.
this, and like Black Belt magazine is like learn the deadly arts for Batman or something,
Oh, that's gonna sell. Why didn't they do that? That would
I
totally
don't know,
sell.
man. I would have just been, I would have bought 1,000 copies. Are you kidding me? It was so fun in like Black Belt magazine. They always had like a section where it's like multiple frames of like how they beat somebody up, like how to do certain, like have an animated version of like, the Joker punching and he's like, you see Batman does it inside block while he breaks the arm, like, it'd be so rad.
Yeah. This is how you avoid Joker toxin. It's just like a flip.
Yeah.
Judo throw, bat judo. Yeah.
It's like this is Bane. You just got to judo chop his like
Right.
his
Make
tubes.
sure that you keep the venom from going in the veins by karate chopping his tubes.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, this sounds like it'd be like a really good side hustle for YouTube because I'm sure there's hundreds of people like, I want to fight like Batman. How do I do it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, have you seen somebody's doing like an AI like death match? And I saw it came up on my feed and it was Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter versus Mr. Rogers. And it was like straight up. I mean, it looked like wow. And they're like, "Ah," and I'm like, what is happening right now? I at first it just came up and I was like, what's happening? And he's got his little vest, and I'm like, this is insane.
Yeah.
This is
Got to do
honestly,
Steve Irwin versus Killer Croc.
yeah, there you go. Seriously, bro. Like
those
why
videos.
isn't that one of the covers, right? Like, this is just a lovely croc, and Batman be like, oh my gosh, Steve Irwin.
And those videos are so humbling. Like there's a couple for like a fighting animes where they'll be like, yeah, if you want to fight like this guy did in this anime, here's how you do it. And then they show you the move and they're like, by the way, you got to work out for like 4 months before you can do this move. And it's like, man, if they did this for Batman, I would really be like, yeah, I can't be Batman. I'm not one of those guys in their 30s. It's like, I can still be Batman.
Yeah, totally. That's what my family and I, we watch Alone. Have you ever watched Alone?
No.
It's like this survival show.
Oh yeah, the one where they like send them off like with like, hey,
like 10 people in different locations. Yeah. And the kicker of it is you don't know if you win until they finally show up and tell you win. So you're just trying to survive and hope. And people are out there for almost 2 months. And what was I going to say about this freaking thing? What I was going to say, the side hustle about the people living. I am sitting on the couch like, yeah, I could do that. And then there's like a moment. There's a moment where you go, yeah, I couldn't do that at all. Like they're eating the guts off this thing that you're like, no. But you'd like to think you can, just like that. Like, yeah, maybe I could. And then I had an experience the other day where, I've done martial arts a lot through my life and off and on, and I had been off. And so I thought, well, I'll just join my daughter's dojo. And, I'm great for about a minute. And then it's like, I'm like dead. There's a 13-year-old like fanning me, trying to hope that I won't puke or like, pass out on the floor because I'm like, wow, I have no endurance whatsoever,
Do you need an ambulance, mister?
Yeah, exactly. Are you okay, sir? When they call you the sir and you're just like, well,
yeah, well, thank you. It's been great catching up.
Yeah.
Troy and I love both Aquaman and Green Lantern. It's been great sort of following your career from Flash to now a DC exclusive. So hopefully one day we get to see you on one of those big books and they won't be able to afford to tell you no to your martial arts turn. That you get so big that it's like, all right, yeah, blank check, whatever. Here, Sienkiewicz can do the cover too. So I really appreciate it and thank you. And we're looking forward to what you do next. So with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.
Bada boom.
Thank you for listening to the Badaboom podcast. Keep the conversation going with Chris and I on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us on all these places at at Badaboom Podcast. Get into the comments on our YouTube channel. Let us know what you like about the show or what you'd like to hear from us in the future. Until next time, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thanks for listening.